Hey, my name is Leah Day, and behind me is Shadows Off, my latest goddess quilt. And I wanted to share with you a little bit about the design process that it took in order to create this quilt. This is kind of the thing that I get the most questions about, because a lot of traditional quilters simply don't understand how a quilter will produce something like this. And this is also kind of the behind the scenes that we never really get about any quilt. When we see a quilt at show, of course it's phenomenal, a show quality quilt, but sometimes, at least I am left wondering why the quilter made the decisions that she did, why she chose the quilting designs that she did. And so I wanted to share with you at least my process. With this quilt, this was the first quilt that I truly designed every aspect of the quilt on paper before playing with any fabric at all. I started, this is tracing vellum, and I started out just simply sketching this design on paper. And the tracing vellum allows you to fold the paper in half either way and trace through the paper. You can see through it. It's almost see-through. And you can create designs very, very easy that are fully symmetrical without the use of a light box, which is really, really nice. This was not very complicated to create. The tools that I was using was a pencil, an eraser, a protractor so I could draw circles, and a ruler. And that's it. It's really not hard if you just give yourself permission to sit down at your kitchen table and play. And I just sat at my table and played for around a month on this design. So this was the original large-scale design of the piecing lines first. Then I started playing with color a little bit, and next time, there's always a next time, there's always another quilt, next time I will spend more time in the color design aspect of a quilt, because that is very important to figure out where you want your colors and how they're going to work, so that when it comes time to put the quilt together, there's not massive issues with, okay, what color goes where, not massive questions. That's not the time that you really want to be dealing with questions like that. You want to answer those questions at the very beginning. I then started doodling and playing with the quilting design. And you can see that the quilt, the goddess, all of a sudden got very, very complicated, going from the piecing lines to the quilting lines. And the reason I did this is because typically in quilts like this, I have been making a huge mistake. All the quilts up until this quilt, I have waited until it's in this stage, into the fully pieced, ready to quilt stage, to pick a quilting design. And that is not the time to be picking a quilting design, because our minds and our eyes get so blocked by those piecing lines, by that big giant circle, by that big giant yin-yang, by the lines of the borders. All of those types of things will stop our eye and we'll look at it and go, I can't quilt over that, what do I do, what do I do, I don't know. And it just ends up being a big nasty mess. It's the reason why Release Your Light, my other goddess quilt, is covered with, almost completely covered with very, very dense fillers, because by the time I got to the quilting process, I hadn't designed anything, and I was intimidated by the idea of adding motifs at that stage of the game. So that's why I took several weeks to come up with this. And I also really love this quilt because I've got such a nice contrast. One side of the quilt is literally blending and bleeding straight into the borders. And that is kind of, the light and love coming from the lighter side of the yin-yang, and her heart is bursting forth. But then there's the darker side of the yin-yang, and that is a beautiful contrast of shape and texture, because instead of flowing lines and nice curving lines, it's instead straight lines and sharp angles. And I'm going to definitely start using this kind of contrast in almost all of my quilts, because it's it's gorgeous. There's no better thing that I can say about it. It not only gives you a nice visual contrast between the dark and the light behind me, but also now it's going to be a texture contrast in the designs that I use when quilting it. So this kind of came together, and when my husband looked at it, he said, you know, that reminds me of Zelda Twilight Princess, which is a video game. And I've had many people look at my quilts and mention that they look like something that you would probably see in a video game. And I think that's really funny because that's one of my favorite games to play. I love Zelda. So, what's the next step? I've gotten this thing designed on paper. It's on tracing vellum. Tracing vellum can't really be scanned well into the computer. It leaves a lot of smudges on the tracing vellum, and then it's also see-through. So it doesn't scan very well. So I always make a copy onto plain white paper, and I try and keep it as clean as possible. So no smudges, no eraser marks, and it might take a couple tries in order to get a piece of paper that's perfect like this. But again, the only tools I used was a protractor, a ruler, a pencil, and an eraser. And that's it. You will need to then outline everything in pen, black pen, in order for it to pick up well on the average scanner. I then created this. This is a kind of a, I guess the best thing you could call it is a swap file of all the different quilting designs. So we have the goddess and the rays. There are 16 rays around the circle. The circle is broken up into 16 pieces. I then took a circle and broke it up into 16 pieces and came up with this angle. And then just simply drew the angle out really long and filled it with the flame design and with the lines of interlocking lines. And I created those designs the same scale as this original design, so that I could take this and lay it over this one using a light box, and I could see through it, and they worked out perfectly. The way I created this, simple symmetry. Draw your triangle, fold it in half, draw half of the design, fold it in half, and trace the other half of it. It's very, very simple. It's not complex. Just use symmetry to create the other half of your design, and it's very simple. Once I got into the actual quilting process, this space was actually too much left open, so I actually ended up taking this and placing it back inside within the design and tracing another set of flames. I also did the head and the heart the same way, and the head's actually upside down here. These squares.